Thank you, Christine. I see we're at 3:02, so I know we only have an hour, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Manira Santhir. I'm the planning manager with the City of San Mateo, and we're here today to have a developers roundtable to talk about the city's objective design standards that we are currently working on. I know this effort has been going on for a few years. We kind of stalled after our 2021 round of outreach. You guys may be aware that we were deep in our general plan and our housing element and a number of major projects, but we're very excited to bring, some options and ideas back to this group and really have a conversation that's focused on what the developers see is happening in the market and what kind of, design standards would make sense for our city. So with that, I do want to introduce our team. So Christine, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we have joining me tonight, or today, rather, we have another one this evening. Laura Reedstone is our associate planner, and she's the project manager for the city on this ODS effort. And we have her email and phone number here, as she's your main point of contact. Team, which includes Laura Stetson, Christine Thompson, and Ellie Gertler, who are joining us today and will be presenting and facilitating most of the conversation. Of course, Laura and I are here to share, the city's perspective, the processes that we have, and any policy questions that you may have. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura Stetson.
Thanks, Manira, and thanks to all of you who are joining us this afternoon. I think I recognize a couple of names from I think it was 2 years ago now almost, that we had our first engagement meeting to really start to ask questions about what are objective design standards and how do we tailor them for San Mateo. And so we have some very specific questions that we have for the development community today. But first, we'll go through a presentation just so everybody has a common foundation if you haven't been following this process to date. Next slide. We will talk about what the objective standards are, present to you an outline of a progress draft and the topics that progress draft includes, but then use the most of the conversation today to ask you questions about 4 very specific topics: reducing massing, transitions for development, open space standards, and also questions about pedestrian connections. But really anything that you want to weigh in on is open today. So please feel free to actively participate when the time comes. We've got about a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll turn it over to the discussion. Next. We are in the second and third phase of what's a 4-phase process. We are looking at getting inputs from residents and the development community before finalizing a draft of the Objective Design Standards, or ODS, to take them forward to a Planning Commission study session. And once the Planning Commission weighs in, to go ahead and take it through the formal public hearing process. There is not a definitive time frame at this point in time. This is all being intertwined with a lot of other things, as Manira said, the city has going on. And so these will all come before the Planning Commission in their due time. But we do want to take the time for this very valuable community input. And we're really glad to see a good group from the development community today. Next. So what are objective design standards? And I'll say ODS. So let's all feel free to use the acronym, or ODDS, as some people say as well. Next. The purpose behind creating objective design standards are to create, not get guidelines, but standards that will apply to all multifamily residential and most mixed-use residential projects in San Mateo. These requirements to create ODS are coming out of some numerous state laws, but there is also a very definitive policy in the city's recently adopted housing element to move forward with these objective design standards to create a really solid foundation of what the city's expectations are for good multifamily design in San Mateo. Next.
I'm having some advancing problems.
Okay, that's
There we go.
see if it, all right, very good. So what are objective design standards? We mentioned what projects they affect, but where are they applicable in San Mateo and how will they work? Next. I mentioned that there have been a slew of laws actually dating back to the early 1980s with regard to how cities should be reviewing housing development projects. And some cities haven't been good players over the years. And so starting about 3 years ago, the legislature started to put new laws in place to streamline housing development and really make it more difficult for communities that were resistant to housing to continue to be resistant. And so there have been a number of laws really focused on housing, but even a law that was effective as of January of this year that allows residential development in commercial zones under very particular circumstances. And so that's what the objective design standards are reacting to. Next. The legislature put these regulations in place, recognizing that not only is there a housing crisis, not enough housing in California, but 41% of communities or actually households are paying more for housing than could be expected. And so people are really funding housing at a rate that is not sustainable. And so that there is this effort to streamline and reduce the hurdles to building housing. And however, allowing each jurisdiction to create its own tailored standards. So the state's not dictating any architectural style or processes. They're just saying you need to make the process easier. Next. Developments that qualify and are subject to this streamlined process are pretty much anything that is not a standalone single family home. And so that ranges from a duplex all the way up to mixed use developments in which at least 2/3 of the floor area is devoted to residential use. Next. On the map, anything that is in a darker yellow color or an orange or a pink are zones that allow multifamily housing and mixed use housing. And so a lot of San Mateo will be subject to the objective design standards. So it applies to many, many zones in the community. Next. As I mentioned, the city is adopted a very strong foundation for having objective design standards. And explicitly, the housing element says to expedite production of housing. Next. So how do we make sure that crafting the objective design standards gets them right for your community, makes them tailored for San Mateo? And so the process of doing that involves looking at what your zoning code says today. What are the gaps? What are in the specific plans? Where are their gaps? The city has a set of multifamily design guidelines, which aren't binding, but a lot of those could be made into standards. So those are part of the process. Listening to the community, investigating what best practices are, and just like today, gaining insight from you to create these standards that are just right for San Mateo. Next. So at this point in time, as I mentioned, that there is a working draft next that covers the 5 general topics that you see on the screen here, anywhere from site planning, which is we're considering the 2-dimensional aspect of planning, to the building and architecture, the 3-dimensional aspects of design, and then those things that start to really accent your entire development site. So there are standards for landscaping, open space, lighting, and then what we've called ancillary features. How do you deal with utilities and where to put utilities on a site, or mailboxes, or other things that aren't the major components of a development? And then also the many specific plans that are in the city have design guidelines in them, and there is a need to bring some of those into standards as part of the objective design standards. And so we have combed through the specific plans to see what needs to be incorporated as well. Next. And Christine and I are going to run through a series of slides here. I'm not going to read everything, but just so that you can see the 5 topics. Site planning addresses these 3 bullet points, those things that you think about at a very large scale when you're planning the site. Next. Building design and architecture addresses everything from massing to additions to existing buildings, and then all of the detailing that's on a building. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about transitioning, because we've heard that that's something that the community is very concerned or interested in. Next. Landscaping includes open space requirements. We're going to hone in on that because the city frequently gets requests from the development community to waive or somehow relieve the standards for landscaping. And so we want to understand what might be the best way to do that in a way that's still going to create quality design. Next. And then we mentioned the ancillary features. And every time I look at a development, I see where they put the utility boxes. I think, why did it go there? Is there a better way to do things that's going to make the development work well? And so that's something that the objective design standards will take on. And then lastly, on the next slide, you see all of the specific plan areas that will be addressed. In particular, there are several specific plans that apply to the El Camino Real corridor, and those standards are not consistent with one another, and they're not consistent with what might be in the zoning code. And so there is a real big attempt to standardize things that apply to El Camino Real. Next. The standards recognize that there are several building typologies in San Mateo, from low-rise to mid-rise and high-rise if somebody requests a density bonus associated with providing affordable housing. And so the objective design standards will recognize these three typologies. Next. Critically, we want to make sure that the objective design standards aren't going to result in uniform, same design on everything that comes in. So that's a foremost goal of the city, is to make sure that there is flexibility, that all architectural designs and styles are accommodated, and also that there's a path to deviate from the objective design standards. So if there's something that's just not working for something that you're proposing, that there is a way to color outside the lines, if you will, from the objective design standards. Next. So Christine, there are several design terms, many of which the audience this afternoon knows, but if you could just go through those so that everybody's on the level of what the objective design standards are going to address.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Yeah, so I'm going to go through this very quickly because it's really about sort of some of the key terminologies used in the objective design standards. They are related to what Laura had said in terms of the major differences between site and landscape and building design. And so just to use some examples and to talk about a wall plane offset, you know, what is a wall plane offset? So there's a wall surface that has a certain depth to it. Sometimes that surface is deeper here, maybe a foot deep. Before it was less deep. The bigger buildings, this could be more than a foot deep, but because the building is so large, it changes its feel. Here it's an even deeper offset, wall plane offset, and it really unitizes per the housing units, the townhouse typology. And sometimes there's a wall plane offset with a unified flat style set of housing units. But nonetheless, the wall plane offset's really important for creating shade and shadow and creating that variety. There also might be a material change or a color change at the wall plane offset. And here an example where it doesn't even go the full height. There's sort of a lower register as well as a pop out, but that creates the depth and the shadow to the design quality. And to contrast that, you can see a flat wall plane. Certainly there's color being used here, but the massing looks quite blocky and solid. And when the wall plane offset is very small, maybe 6 inches, it still has that feeling of large and square. So talking about some other elements, the step back is a commonly used technique to pull the massing back and to reduce the appearance of height. So this is above the 3rd floor. This is another step back above the 3rd floor, but the 2nd floor also has a lot of variety in the front. Again, the step back at the 2nd floor is often used. It sort of depends on the location and situation of the building. In this case, there's a step back at the second floor on one side of the street, which is not uniform on the other side of the street. So there might be a particular location or reason for that step back. And in this case, this is closer to a single family or smaller, duplex multi-family situation, but it's meant to kind of maintain the feel of the neighborhood to put that step back the way it's organized. So the transitions, as Laura mentioned, there you will find new residential development near existing residential, which may be a lower, smaller size and scale. So that question of how do you transition from a one-story context? Sorry, I went backwards. Another example of transitioning from a one-story context, going up to 3 stories and then taller to 5 stories. And on the other side is a major corridor. So it feels great against the major corridor, but the smaller homes and the context are important. This is an example of a different approach where there's landscape screening and there's attached homes next to single family detached homes. And so it's a different technique in terms of how the size and scale is. This is a compact multifamily home on a corner, but it has a similar size and scale to the existing single family homes. Again, another example of the 1 story to 2 story to 3 stories, sort of a gradual transition to an area where the higher heights makes a lot of sense. So talking a little bit about the base middle top. How is the base middle top identified? On the left, you'll see a commercial situation where the ground floor is commercial, so that's a mixed use, but a very clear top with a tower, a very strong cornice line, and on the right in San Mateo, a more subtle differentiation, but still clearly different parts of the building. So here, looking at the color, there's contrasting colors used, contrasting materials. It might be on a wall surface, differentiate different parts of the wall surface. It might be the color of the broad wall and then trim work, so that it's really a question of contrasting colors, but at different sizes and scales. Sometimes those contrasting colors articulate a certain geometry that allows for detail in a building, as well as showing different window approaches and materiality. And here you can see a building element, particularly around the balconies and the center module of the building is a different color than the ends. And again, another contrasting color image used a little bit differently. A couple of other elements that have come up is this question about the bottom floor, and particularly the bottom floor when it's a commercial. How are the windows sizes and scales different? Are there awnings? Is the residential pushed back from the major roadway? Is the residential up high? Is the base of the building clad in a heavier, more durable element like brick or material, I should say? Other elements to think about and the objective design standards are focused on is thinking about how the recessed doorways, how deep those should be and how they should meet the public realm. Lots of examples of a deeper or a less deep recessed on a doorway. So thinking about those building details, what does it mean to have a pathway that's attractive and pedestrian oriented, and how can you clarify the entrance and what is the advantage of a recess? Also, parking garage screens come up. What about the materiality of the parking? The wood slats or metal? Is it more of like a garage? Would it be important to have a differentiation of material like windows? Or could it even be a metal screen or a screen that's sort of the same style and quality of this lower register, but allows a wide opening for cars to move in and out. So really that was an introduction to terms, and I'm going to turn it back over to Laura at this time to talk about some of the key questions and the focus of the interactive session. Oh, you're on mute, Laura.
Thanks, Christine. There are 4 key topics we want to discuss: massing, transition, open space, and pedestrian connections. With regard to massing, what we've listed here are the things that will be incorporated into the objective design standards. And we're interested in hearing from you how these standards should be structured to give the flexibility that you're looking for as developers, architects, designers. And so next slide, the questions are, and you don't need to write these down, we'll have them on our discussion board when we get to it. But we're looking at response for the building planes and how can you reduce massing? What do you feel are the best ways to reduce massing through building plane variation? What's too much? What's enough? Is 6 inches enough? 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet? What would start to impede the ability to design something good inside that relates well to what's being asked for on the outside of the building? Roofs contribute as well to the apparent massing of a building. And so what are your preferences for roofing regulations? Are there other techniques? How can you use colors and materials most effectively, or other features on a building to reduce the massing? Next. For transitions, people usually, if they're in a single-story, single-family home, don't like to have a building next to them that looms over or encroaches into their space. And so we are proposing a couple of approaches to transitioning, depending on the height of the building. And some people say, well, if you do it too much, it starts to look like a wedding cake. What can we do to avoid wedding cake looks on transitions? And a lot depends, as we've said, on what the size of the building is that you're building. But is there a way perhaps just to have a larger setback for the entire wall plane for maybe a lower scale building so that you're not having to step it back and have the wedding cake look simply by pushing the entire building back to a wider setback line? Next. So the question is, do you have preferred approaches to deal with these transition issues? What have you found most effective in your work? And do you feel that landscape screening perhaps is an option as well? Next slide. Open space. The city has requirements currently that regulate both open space for private use and for common space of all tenants in a building. There are a number of different ways of calculating it. It might vary from specific plan to specific plan. And so the city is looking at creating standards that are a little bit more uniform, but have flexibility between where you're putting it for private and common. What counts as open space? Balconies, hardscaped areas that are simply courtyards, rooftops. So the questions we have for you are, next slide. What are you finding that the market prefers when you're planning for open space? Are people looking for more passive versus active, private versus common? Is there a different formula that you're using if it's a mixed use building versus a residential, or if it's for sale versus rental? As we noted at the top of the presentation, from the open space standards. And so they want to hit on something that's going to work for everybody in terms of the amenities that are desired. And then where's the best place to put open space? What can we do when we're putting the objective design standards together to make sure that we get the open space requirements Goldilocks sized? Next slide. Pedestrian connections. It's important to in a walkable community, which San Mateo desires, is to ensure that there is a good connection to the sidewalks. And so typically for a single family, you can use stoops or porches, but what features are most effective to create that connection for the multifamily housing if it relates to the street, and to connect the parking lot areas to the buildings themselves. And next slide. For the pedestrian connections, that's precisely the question, is what's the preferred method of making that connection? But also, if there is a whole block being developed, is there a desire to create paseos to break down the massing, but also to create those connections to what's in the block behind? And is there a desire to see those, or does it start to take away from the ability to meet the maximizing development on a site? Next slide. So those are the questions we have for you. We invited you here today, and we're so happy you are here to respond to these questions and to share your ideas. And we've got about, I think 12 or 13 people as participants right now. So Christine, if you could stop sharing screen, I'm going to switch over to the mural board, and we will go ahead and what we would ask is that you can just either raise your hand or and then we'll go ahead and call on you. And it looks like we're going to go ahead and promote everybody to participants. So that
I'm going to allow everyone to talk.
That's great.
And then you also ask them to turn on their screen. So I will also promote them to participate. Okay, so this will allow us to have a very roundtable type discussion. So we'd ask that you raise your hand and we'll call on you. And as an alternative, if you want to type something into the chat, we'll go ahead and post it on our mural board, which I will bring up just momentarily here. And we've got Ellie taking good notes for us today. So while we do have 4 questions that we're focused on, what I'd like to do is to go ahead and call on folks, and you can address anything you like so that we're not having to say, okay, let's first talk about massing. I think maybe if you could address anything that's on your mind, we'll go ahead and get the notes down and then go on to the next person and go from there. So I'll go ahead and open it up for the first person who would like to raise his or her hand.
And if you could also please introduce yourself and share who you're representing, that'll be great as well. Thank you.
Looks like Terry, you have volunteered to go first, so please, yes.
Wonderful. Well, my name is Terry Reeves. I'm a principal at Carlson, Barbie & Gibson. We're a civil engineering land development firm in Santa Rosa. And I got invited to come to this, which is great. I'm actively working on a project with Harvest Properties over on Campus Drive. Took down some office buildings. We're building some condos and single family homes way up on the hill. And I came into this, and I guess my focus in this process is from a designer and an engineer processor through this, is trying to understand the actual process, right? I guess my focus is less on the massing and open space, those requirements that, are requirements. I'm looking more at how we manage and process or go through the process, right? How are plans submitted? We're having a lot of challenges to the projects we're going through right now, and understanding a streamlined process between public improvements and private improvements, and how that actual processing wants to go is really what my focus is. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. It's kind of not really in what you guys are looking at in this presentation, but that's, there is some desire to help understand and streamline the submittal and approval processes, not only through entitlements and design review, but all the way through construction documents through the end of the project. And I think from our perspective, there are some things on the city standpoint or the city side that could be improved upon that could help that process from our perspective.
Well, thank you, Terry. Perhaps I could speak to that, Laura, since it's not directly tied to the ODS, but
Sure.
We are constantly looking for ways to streamline our processes, Terry. So feel free to reach out to us directly. I think the focus of today's conversation is really to get input on these 4 topics.
That's why I figured raise my hand quick and I'll say my piece and get out of the way. And
Absolutely. And I do want to say that the ODS is an effort towards streamlining the processes, because currently our rules are subjective, they're discretionary. And by putting these ODS standards in place, we hope that it provides more predictability to developers, and it makes it easier for everyone who's involved in a project development. So hopefully this is a step in the right direction for that.
For sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised right now, so I might just go ahead and call on folks if you don't mind, because we really are interested in having folks weigh in. What can be done to make this easiest for you in the development community? And I think I will start with Ken Bush. Ken, is there
Hi.
something you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, can you folks hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. First of all, I really want to thank you for including me and including the development community in this. I know that, the objective standards are a big deal, and especially how, planning is, or the state rules are changing or have changed. So I think it's great. I think, a lot of it's some of it's in flux, only because, you're updating your general plan now, so I'm not sure what kind of densities are going to be allowed within that general plan. And I think that the densities that a community that's being developed is going to have a huge impact on the design standards. I think looking at some of the examples you had of single family homes, you're going to have a very different example for a multifamily home. Today, a lot of the communities that are being built, outside of San Mateo, because of the height limit, are really 5/2. So there are 2 levels of parking at grade, and you have 5 levels of residential above that. So, and obviously that would have very different design standards than a single family home or the current communities in San Mateo that are basically, or with under, I think it's 65 feet, right? So
Ken, if I could jump in, I think we are looking to have these standards apply to what was it, low rise, mid rise, and high rises. So if you have suggestions for mid rises and high rises, like how could you reduce massing for those type of buildings, or how could you incorporate open space? Like we'd really like to hear from you. Like what are some of the techniques you may have used that worked and that worked for the community and worked for the residents?
Yeah. So what I could do is I'd like to go through my talk here, but then I could bring up some examples of some other communities that we've built and show you how we've addressed certain elements, because a lot of the items. So, but I think the guidelines need to be different for a single family home than for a type 3 building. That's all I'm trying to say. There needs to be a segmentation within those guidelines,
Absolutely.
which I'm sure you're planning on doing. It just didn't. So I wanted to put that out there. And a lot also is going to tie back to what kind of density is allowed now with this density bonus law. That provides a little bit of flexibility, because there are some standards that you can meet or you can't meet, which that gives you some flexibility. But I think having a framework to work within and to strive to achieve, I think that's very, very, very important. It gives everyone some guidance for that and that flexibility. So I think there needs to, in the reduce massing, I think you definitely, I think you're right on. You need to have the rhythm of the building. There needs to be, I call it a rhythm, so that there's something that's going on there. And when you get to, when you're approaching a building, there needs to be something to draw your eye. And that could be both either positive or negative space. What we've done successfully is had a roof deck on a building to drop something down, to give it that space, and then you can highlight that with some lighting or something in there, so you can see it from a distance. And then, but we've always had some type of rhythm where I'm going to use balconies as the example of how that rhythm's achieved. There are some situations where we don't put balconies on if it's adjacent to a freeway, just because there's some noise issue. People aren't going to be using that area. And as Manera, like we work together, you might not want to put balconies next to the train tracks, because they're not as desirable for the residents. They're not going to be used as much there. Although there's always a school of thought. So that and but I think a rhythm is really important as you look at a pattern language for what's done. And then there's the transition, like you're talking about. A lot of sites, if you can find a 1 acre site or 2 acre, a lot of sites are like 1.5 acres. It's hard to find more than 2 acres, unless you're doing a master plan like Concord or something of that nature. It's hard to find that larger master plan to make things fit. So you kind of need to use all the space you have to get there, as you're to be successful and to actually be able to control the property. You've got to find some way to fit everything in there. So there could be a plaza or something of that nature, but I think that there needs to be some sensitivity to that, and also on the transitions. Typically, your zoning itself provides some transition from a single family home to a type 3 building. You typically don't have adjacent to each other. So that almost provides that height transition to get to that space. Okay, I mean, there are some situations where that doesn't happen. And the other challenge there is you'll have, I'm going to call them some legacy properties that are in those single family, there might be a single family home in an area that's zoned for, you know, a higher density. And then it's hard to really marry those two. Do you kind of look towards the past? Do you look to the future? So I think that's, you know, a reconciliation that needs to be worked through.
That's a really important point, Ken, as the city's writing these standards, is to recognize just not what it's there, but what could be there. And that's something
Yeah.
that the objective design standards are looking to do.
Because I mean, I'm just going to give you a little vignette. We developed a community in South San Francisco, and one of our neighbors had a sign that wanted to be visible. We obstructed the sign. It was a big brouhaha. And 2 years later, he's re-entitled his property for something, a different use where the sign's coming down. Okay.
And you're all familiar with those challenges.
Yeah.
Do you, oh, sorry. Do you have
So
suggestions on open space and pedestrian connections as well? I heard
I'm sorry.
for massing
Yeah.
and transitions.
Yeah. So on the open space, you
Mhm.
know, everyone has an open space. I think that, you know, it's a mix of private and public.
Mhm.
Again, it depends on whether there's a constraint in that context. I'd be careful about requiring a paseo within, let me call it a 1 acre a city block, because if it doesn't connect to anything, there needs to be something else in the rhythm of the fabric of the city, or some street space that actually creates the need for that paseo running through a property. I think it would be dangerous to say that anything that's 1 acre needs to have some type of paseo going through it. I think you can, you know, so that would be one thing there. Where are we now? What amenities? I think that's a difficult one, just because different product types have different amenity requirements. You know, an apartment might have an amenity requirement for a pool, but a condo might not. Okay, and traditionally in our marketplace, the condos have a lower density than the rental apartments. Does that kind of get? Were there any other items?
Not quite yet. Let's see if we've got somebody else
Yeah.
who wants to weigh in on the open space questions. Because we're really focusing in on that. That has been the most vexing issue as we put the objective design standards together. Is there? I'm going to call because I don't see any hands up. Anyone want to weigh in on open space?
I see a hand raised, Laura.
Oh, there we
Richard
go.
Norris. Mhm.
There we go. Richard, please.
Hi there, Richard Norris with Summerhill Apartment Communities. And yeah, I just want to reiterate what Ken said about how grateful we are to be included in this process. Regarding open space, to agree with what Ken said about the requiring balconies on, or requiring every unit to have private open space, I would recommend against that. We've worked in cities where it's required, and the STC levels will prevent us from being able to do that, because there's only a certain number of door manufacturers we can use for patio doors, and we can't always use one of those patio doors and still meet the requirements indoors, if that makes sense. So basically there's not high enough STC doors to be able to have a patio and a door and meet Title 24 requirements. I'd also say having like prescribed at grade open spaces is often very difficult. A lot of times I've seen cities where it goes a little bit above and beyond what can be accommodated. And then also not every area, we see requirements for plazas often, and not every site is a good location for a beautiful corner plaza. Like there's, using the example of El Camino Real, some cities have asked for plazas there, and it's it doesn't always make the most sense, because you're not going to sit and drink coffee while the cars whiz by.
And Richard, something that we're really pressing on for the objective
Yeah.
design standards is to give people options.
Yeah.
And so the thought is, here are 5 things that you could do 3 of them, and you'll meet the standard. So we're trying to avoid absolute prescription. And so it's nice to have you hone in on one particular thing that says, this doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, and it's nice to ask for it, but don't require us to do it.
Yeah, and I think you got to be really careful about not going overboard, because there's often when the requirements are something that looks good on paper, it doesn't always work when you actually go to design a site. Kind of like what you guys were alluding to earlier with the I think it was 3 different sets of rules that don't always mesh, and you end up with something like that. If you have a minute to talk about, can I talk about massing a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, yes, please.
Awesome. So I think I've seen cities where we're required to do step backs and wall transitions at certain floor levels. I mean, almost all of our buildings, actually all of them that I've worked in, have had them. And like what Ken he was talking about, the 5/2s, that's pretty much what is happening for mid-rise projects. Is 2 levels of type 1 with 5 levels of type 3. The best place to put a lot of transitions is at the podium level, is what we've found when you transition from the wood or the concrete to the wood. But depending on the site, it might be 3 levels of concrete, it might be 2 levels, it might only be 1 level. So having a prescribed level to have that step back is hard, and especially when it's at the 4th level or 5th level, it gets harder, because then you're running reinforcement. You're basically running posts and all sorts of, like, mixing steel posts, beams, everything, to be able to have this step back at higher levels, and it gets expensive and might not get the bang for the buck. That said, we will do it if we, sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not to do it at upper levels, but I try to, oh, sorry.
Is it a viable option, Richard, to just push the entire building back? So you have more of a straight wall up, or but you start to lose
That's
footage,
what, yeah,
obviously.
yeah, and that's the balance, right? Is to, that's why I'm saying it's best to not prescribe exactly what level, because different sites, you want to maintain flexibility for site design, right? It might not make sense, not all of them.
And Laura, maybe that's where, you could say, okay, one way of achieving a transition, do one of these, like either set it back more or do the step back at the 2nd or 3rd level or within a certain height, so that there's more flexibility.
Or even when the material changes in the building, the construction material, because it sounds like that's the biggest consideration, is you want to break it where it makes sense, depending on your construction type.
And then I guess in terms of roofs, typically the roof that makes the most sense is a flat roof with a parapet around it. And that's just because you can use, you can get as many units as possible, and then you're able to put your solar, you're able to do all the things that we have to do on the roof, solar, all the condensers, all the equipment up there. And it doesn't add mass like a pitched roof would. So and on a type 3 over type 1 building, the pitched roofs 75 feet in the air don't always make sense.
And Richard, you said you're with Summerhill, and you guys are doing a lot of higher density multifamily, right? Not something like what we've got on the screen right here, the 3-story, more of a
we'll do that for the on the for sale side. I'm speaking to mid-rise apartments.
Okay. So for
Yeah.
something that is lower scale, the pitch roofs do work.
Yeah, and that's not really my area of expertise, so I'll refrain from speaking to it.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Richard,
then
anything on the what else did we have here? I know we covered massing and the transitions and open spaces. What was the fourth topic, Laura?
Pedestrian connections.
Anything about that you'd like to add?
oh, I mean, I would agree with Ken again to go with a common theme. Yeah, the paseos don't always make sense, and this is, I mean, it will like really reduce the yield for the site, and I mean we have to be able to include enough units to make a landowner willing to sell to a multifamily developer versus whomever else they're thinking of selling to.
And our thought on the sales returns too, you do need a larger development site to even consider something like that.
Okay.
What would be that break point, Richard, or Ken, like if you were to say, okay, if you're 2.5 acres, maybe that's the break point, or is it like 1.5 acres or 5 acres? Like, what would you think is that break point?
I mean, to me, it would make the most sense if it's a site that needs more than one podium, right? If you're going to like 5 acres, we would probably look at doing 2 buildings, and then a paseo between them would make sense, and we would probably put like the fire EVA through there to maintain our whatever aerial access requirement we need.
Okay.
I don't know, Ken, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's it. You know, I don't know, Richard. You know, the Essex deal that was just approved up in
Linden?
Yeah, because that's, you know, that's 500 units, so it's got to be a fairly large site, and you know, and it's one building. So I'd be
No, yeah.
so I'd have to. I think a big consideration is really what is the urban fabric around it. You know, like is there a connection that the public has and that they've been using? Then I'd want to do something to maintain that.
Yeah. That makes
Okay.
sense.
And if there isn't, if it's kind of, you know, in a corner, so to speak, or there's not a break, if it's a full city block, it's a full city block. You know, but that would be my consideration too.
Yeah, not putting a connection to nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't need that.
Yeah.
Richard or Ken, any thoughts on entry residential? Like what makes an entry residential? So even with the mid rises and the high rises, you have entry lobbies, or you want to break down and maybe for the ground floor units have some kind of stoops. Like what typically has worked?
You want to go first, Richard, or you want me?
I mean, it's totally site specific in the neighborhood, and just what you're doing with the sidewalks and the street trees and what you're trying to do there. So I think it totally depends on the site and the architecture, what you're going to do.
And the street that you're facing too.
Yeah.
That's really true. I'm going to use our South San Francisco community as an example. And I don't know how familiar you are with it, but there's Airport Boulevard, which was a boulevard. It's, you know, high traffic area. You know, I guess you call it an arterial on one side, and then there's Cypress on the other side. So on Airport, we, you know, the garage is on the first floor and the second floor, and it exposes itself to Airport. But then on Cypress, you know, there we have townhouses to maintain and encourage the walkability along that street. So, you know, I think if there's a pedestrian use in that area, I think it makes sense. If not as much. And then to your question specifically about the entry, you know, we've done it both ways. Typically what we'll do is we'll have, not always, but we'll have an entry at a corner so that it can maximize the visibility. And there are reasons we might change that from a marketability perspective. And we might have volume there, but we probably, even if we didn't have volume, we'd have something to highlight the area on the second floor. And that could be a fitness center or something of that nature. It really depends on, candidly, the land seller and what they're willing to, because we might not be able to get to a number that we might not have the opportunity to buy something, without it. Can I share my screen?
Well, Ken, we are running low on time.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Sorry
you can send us comments. We really appreciate the deep dive that you guys are doing. So please send us comments and examples. We'd love to see those. But I do want to open it up, Laura, I think to others as well. So we've heard from Richard and Ken. Would others like to share some of their thoughts or their experiences, or what other items could be included in a menu of options?
And things that would help you and not frustrate you. Are there things that are frustrating now that you'd like the objective design standards to address in some manner? And Kevin, you have your hand up. Please share with us.
Yeah, this is Kevin Choi. I'm at Harvest Properties. I think kind of listening to everything you're saying, and again, I will go ahead and echo what Ken and Richard said already. And thank you for letting us be involved in this process. We're very excited to see it move forward. I think where I'm coming from in this, it actually frankly applies to kind of all 4 topics that you have up here. And it's, I think these objective design standards are going to be something that's going to be very helpful as long as there's flexibility, right? And that flexibility piece is incredibly key because, all of the sites that I've been a part of have very unique qualities that you frankly want to celebrate in the development's process and in the development's form and shape or outdoor space, right? And so, there are certain sites that are, as some of my I guess I'll say colleagues have said, not exactly just colleagues, but these various sites have various aspects and adjacencies which reflect in certain ways of height, setback, open space, amenities, etc. And the ultimate goal for us, right, is finding where those all mesh and into a project that's financeable, provable, buildable, right? And so I think I just want to impart the idea of flexibility coming into this is something that's going to be key to ensure that we don't necessarily have to drop a project because maybe it can't meet enough of the prescriptive design standards.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
What I'm hearing, Manira, that's very heartening is that people are taking great care to understand what the site is telling them and what needs to be on that site based on not just finances, but reaction to the community and reaction to the neighbors, the physical neighbors, the people neighbors and the building neighbors. And so we need to make sure that this objective design standards don't constrain any of that.
Absolutely, Laura. And I also feel like to Kevin's point, like we also need to make sure that internally, like these design standards are consistent with each other, that, if they are additive and suddenly they make something completely infeasible, like that's not something we would want. So we have to look at that carefully as well.
Yeah. And everybody will have the opportunity to look at the draft in great detail before it moves on to the Planning Commission.
Yes.
The process is to make sure that it's well vetted before it's put into some form that goes forward through the public hearing process. Manir, I know we had just scheduled to go to 4 o'clock. I think we've actually got the Zoom reserved for until 4:30 if there are people who want to stay a little bit longer. If you're okay extending the meeting a little bit, I'll leave that up to you.
No, absolutely, Laura. So I was going to say we are at 4 minutes. If there's somebody who is, who has to peel off at 4, perhaps if you'd like to go next, and then if others are okay with staying a little bit longer, we are happy to stay a little bit longer as well.
See a hand up.
I do. I can't see whose hand that is though. Can you?
Jonathan
There we go.
Stone?
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Jonathan Stone with Prometheus Real Estate Group, and again, echoing Kevin and Richard and Ken's comments. Thank you all for the time here and the invite to make comment. Quickly, I think our main comments, along with the ones we've heard already, are just to make sure that when the density bonus law is implemented, that there's the ability to, I think, as we've heard already, for flexibility. So as some of these potentially, if they're so stringent and objective, that there is the ability to flex towards a positive solution that can provide the necessary housing, but also end up with a positive design experience. We're working in a few other municipalities right now that have objective design standards in place, and through the use of the density bonus law, some of those are adjusted, and then some could be expanded upon. So as height and massing needs to increase, and the upper boundaries of a building need to be established in order to accommodate the square footage, that can actually free up some space down below to make amenity space like a courtyard ultimately larger than might be required. So making sure that there's the ability to have that understanding and discussion is in order to find a design solution, I think is a positive way to ultimately implement things along this line.
Jonathan, we'd be interested in knowing where you've been doing work and you're finding that the objective design standards are not constraining what you'd like to accomplish. Something that works well and is not overbearing versus some that you're finding challenges with. What are those things that you're finding you really need to have waivers from?
Sure. So as an example, and I'd be happy at a later date to get into the weeds, but there are a number of cities that have, as you go up higher into 6 and 7 and 8 stories, that those upper floors are required to set back or wedding cake, as was described. And if that were to be done, you wouldn't be able to achieve the amount of ultimate massing or square footage required in order to provide the residential housing per the density bonus law. But what that also does is allow you to be more creative with effectively what is in multifamily housing, just a series of ideally double loaded corridors. And if you can maneuver those around the footprint of the site, ultimately you can go taller, which impacts some of the design standards, but you can free up courtyard space and providing amenity space to those users in the building. And it's really the amount of amenity space that you have, you can then program in a way that's, I think, a benefit to all of those users in the building.
Are you finding that there are particular amenities that the ultimate users are looking for one over another? Is it the common space versus private space? Is there a move?
I'd say those sort of ebb and flow, and it's a function of your end result of how much you can get. If a pool or a hot tub or barbecue space, or that amenity space that is internal that you can carve out into active recreation or quiet workspace, but it's the ability to have the flexibility to achieve that overall space. That's the key.
Good. That's great to know. So don't dictate or avoid dictating X square feet of private and X square feet of public or common per unit or per yeah.
Correct. And frankly, the density bonus will allow for those to be pushed aside. But at the same time, knowing that's the case, I think is the key. So a desired design objective is I think how these should be framed, knowing that with the implementation of the density bonus law, a solution can be found that's going to provide the housing that's needed and required, as well as best of a amenity package and overall design solution that can be achieved as well.
Great, thank you. And Manira, several folks dropped off before we had a chance to say, please get additional comments into us, but even post meeting, but we'll find a way to follow up with them and find. Richard, before we come back to you, I just wanted to check to see if Vinny or Chen or Maddie Fowle wanted to weigh in, since they hadn't had a chance to, and they stuck around till after 4.
Laura, I think they're just listening in.
They're just listening. Okay. Very good.
I think Richard wanted to close out with some comments.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you. Thank you for letting me get up very high on my soapbox. I would say regarding open space, going back to it, public open space is always the hardest to provide. And that's kind of why I was talking about it with like plazas and whatnot, because it's almost always at grade level, right? And so that really reduces what you're able to do in terms of providing the housing above. Like it limits your site, and then it's just very problematic. And then one last thing on massing, one thing that I've seen in a city that has worked well is specifying that unit balconies are able to count as whatever break you're looking for, because some cities have not done that, and it's problematic. And then along that same vein, giving a range of how often the breaks or the wall plane step backs need to be to be realistic in that range, because I've seen cities where like one example, it had to be every 25 to 50 feet. Well, a typical unit is what, like 30 feet or so. So you can't have a step back every unit and still build a functional, livable building.
So you're thinking 30 feet, Richard, is a good metric to use because
Oh
of
my
the way
gosh,
it relates to the interior space?
Well, yeah, if you look at, I mean, a standard unit floor plan, they're what, like 25 to 35 feet, depending on the unit at the walls, somewhere in there. I don't know if all the other developers have dropped off, so I have no backup. I'm just flipping through, and they're generally, yeah, I think the narrowest I'm seeing is like right around 20, and then going up to just over 35
okay.
on my most recent building. So yeah, but being cognizant of that to not require a plane shift every unit.
Richard, would it be helpful to provide a range?
Yeah. Oh, definitely to provide a range. I think that's very helpful, and to allow the balcony, specify that the balcony can count, and to have that range not be every 2 units. If it's something substantial, if you're gonna like dictate it's a 5-foot wall setback or something like that, every 2 units would be problematic.
Richard, just to clarify, you're saying that the balconies should be able to count towards that break.
Yeah, depending how you read it or how you
Mhm.
word it. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but that is very helpful, because that, I mean, and like what Ken was saying, it adds the rhythm of the building, and it's pretty standard for them to count, I think.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's the first time we've heard that comment, so thank you.
Oh my gosh, I've gone through a lot of codes, and I've always run into that issue.
Well, we appreciate your feedback, Richard, and all those who had joined today. I think people had to peel off, so we ran a little bit over time, but I think this is a great conversation to have, and really appreciate your input, and look forward to more of it once we actually release a draft, because then we will have some specific items in there, which we would love to get your feedback on.
Yeah, definitely. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.